Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest today is Robert Powell. He was the director of research at MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, from 2007 to 2017, and also founded MUFON's Science Review Board. Currently, he's on the board of the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs. He's also a member of the Society for Scientific Exploration, the UFO Data Project, and the National Space Agency. I'll be talking with Robert about his book, UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. Robert Powell, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Hi, Stan. It's nice to be here.
You, Robert, have a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry, have 28 years experience in engineering management in the semiconductor industry, helped advanced micro devices develop the first flash memory technology that is used in today's flash cards for cameras, PCs, video cameras, and other products. Your experience also includes managing a state-of-the-art chemistry laboratory and managing a research and development group that worked on nanotechnology using atomic force microscopes, near-field optical microscopy, and other techniques. Now, having said that, there's a reason why I said that. On the surface, it would seem to most people, I think, that your background and credentials in the field of science are light years away from the UFO UAP phenomena. What I would like to know, Robert, is when you first developed an interest in the UFO UAP phenomena and what led to that interest?
That's a good question, Stan. So my first interest was probably when I was a teenager, and I had read J. Allen Hynek's book, The UFO Experience. That book is written kind of with a little scientific edge and flair to it, and I really took to it. It made sense to me, and I kind of filed it away in the back of my head because you're going through high school, then you go to college, get married, life happens. And so the world of UFOs I put to the side during all of that time. I was fortunate in that I was able to retire early. So I retired in 2006 at the age of 53 from the semiconductor field. First thing I did, right, is, okay, here's my list. What all would I like to do in life? What are the other things? And one of them was, okay, go back and check out that whole UFO thing. Is there anything to it? One of the things I did was I joined MUFON because that was the main civilian organization at the time. And I said, okay, I'm going to see what I can learn and see if there is anything to this. When I first joined MUFON, I applied for their position for director of research. In the position, it said, we want someone who can figure out where UFOs come from, how they fly, who is in them, and all these things. And with a science background, I said, no way. I mean, I can't tell you who's in it. I can't tell you how they fly. And I don't know where they come from. And I don't think I'll ever figure out any of those three. So that's what I wrote. And when I applied for the position, so I figured they would just pass me by since I kind of blew off their main 3 points. Lo and behold, they accepted me for that position. And that's what got me started in the world of UFOs.
UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know, provides a scientific rationale for the reality of non-terrestrial craft that are intelligently controlled. What, Robert, motivated you to write on that subject, and why do you feel it's important the information in your book be read by the general public?
Another good question there, Stan. And I've actually written 2 books prior to this. One was a book written for children. It's called The Truth About UFOs. The other one I wrote is more of a collegiate book that looks at the history of the subject. And I wrote that with Dr. Michael Swords. And it's called UFOs, A Historical Perspective. But this book, to your question, I wrote because it reflects what I've learned over the last 17 years. And there's two conclusions that I have in the book that I talk about right up front. And one is that UFOs are an actual physical object that are real. And second is that they are controlled intelligently by something that's far in advance of us. Those are two of the things that I feel confident about after studying this subject 17 years. I'll let your audience know I've spent probably an average of 20 hours a week on the subject. I have interviewed several hundred people in person, and I've read thousands of reports on UFOs. So, as my wife would tell you, I've spent way too much time on the subject.
You begin your book, Robert, by familiarizing your readers with the history of UFOs, and you identify the more enigmatic and interesting UFO sightings. Can you, Robert, describe some of those sightings?
Yes, I'll describe some of those sightings. And the reason I kind of go into the history a little bit, but not into heavy detail, is because I want the book to also be readable by individuals who've never studied the UFO subject. I try to give a reader kind of a flavor and background from the beginning. Some of the cases that I cite are some of my favorite. The case of the 4 Army National Guardsmen in a helicopter over Ohio in the 1970s. They're flying over the Mansfield area, and suddenly one of them sees a light far off, and the light's headed towards them. And one of the first things that they think is, okay, we're about to have an accident with some type of aircraft. And so the colonel takes over the controls of the helicopter. Then suddenly this light that was headed towards them is suddenly right in front of them. And it is a large football-shaped object. And their helicopter is just sitting here with the object in front of them, and they're bathed in a green light. These 4 Army National Guardsmen all report the same thing, that this object's in front of them, everything inside their helicopter's green, and then within a short period of time, it suddenly departs. When it leaves, the colonel is looking at his altitude meter, and his helicopter is 1,000 feet higher up in elevation than it was when all of this began. That's one of the examples that I give. And I go through example after example. And the examples I pick are ones kind of like this one, where there's only one of a couple of possibilities. Either what their story is they're telling you is true, because the object's so close to them. It's not like they have misidentified this object that's a balloon or another helicopter or something like that. Clearly, it's what they said they saw, or they've made up the story. It's hard to say there's any other possibilities. And so those are the type of cases that I really like. A case where there's no obvious explanation.
The characteristics of those sightings are examined by you. Did you find that they had similarities? If you did, what were the threads that connected them?
That's actually a difficult question in a way. There are similarities, and I'll discuss some of those, but there's also large differences. It's almost like every case has certain unique qualities that you don't always hear somewhere else, but there are similarities. One of the ones that I really focus on are the cases where there is extreme acceleration. By that, I mean an object that's basically not moving and suddenly takes off at an extreme rate of speed and disappears from the sight of the witness. And the reason I focus on that is we don't have the capability of taking an object or an aircraft of any type that's sitting still, suddenly moves at a rapid rate, and then sits still again. An helicopter can sit still, or an F-35 can sit still for a little while, and then they can suddenly accelerate, but then they can't suddenly stop again, not at high accelerations. Most aircraft, like if you go to an air show and you see an F-16 or an F-18, that jet, as it's flying past you, will take anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds to disappear. And that's with it already moving at a high rate of speed. These objects disappear within 1 to 2 seconds. That is an extreme acceleration, something that we don't have the capability of doing. That is a commonality that I focus on. And then I also focus on the strangeness of UFOs, their ability to suddenly cause another aircraft or an automobile to stop. And it's more than just stop the automobile, because we can do that today, with electromagnetic fields. But there are cases where the automobile stops, the UFO leaves, and then the automobile is suddenly running again, starts right back up. Now that we can't do. Or in the case of an incident that occurred over Tehran, Iran, back in the 1970s, where they have 2 of their F-4 jets that are heading towards a UFO, and they lose their weaponry power and they lose communications, but the jet can still fly. So it's like they lose just pieces of their electrical equipment, not all of it. I focus on those, on the bending of light that has been seen with some UFOs. This is what J. Allen Hynek called the strangeness of it. Why would anyone make up such a crazy story? Why would someone tell you that they were out hunting and right in front of them was a barbell-shaped object just floating in the air? If you're going to make up a story, you wouldn't make up a barbell floating in the sky. Those are the type of stories that have come out of the world of UFOs.
As we all know, Robert, because there was so much media coverage around it, recent events have caused the U.S. government to change the term UFO to UAP. That got me thinking about a line Shakespeare wrote for his play Romeo and Juliet, that being, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." So I ask you, is a UFO still a UFO, no matter what you call it? And in your opinion, Robert, how significant is it that the government now refers to unidentified flying objects as unidentified anomalous phenomena?
I talk about that in the book, that exact question. The book is called UFOs, not UAP. And there's a reason for that. And that's because the average person still thinks of this as UFO. The reason it became UAP, and I found out about this actually by talking to the head of the UAP task force. That was the government organization that existed prior to the current one, which is called ARROW. So the guy who headed up the UAP task force, he told me why they changed the name to UAP. And this happened in the year 2020 and 2021. He was going before Congress to brief congressmen on UFOs. He wanted them to hear the story. He didn't want it to just disappear. He wanted the story told. So the thing he knew, if you put yourself back in the year 2020, and there's still the stigma with the whole subject of UFOs, he felt that if he went to Congress and said, "I need to brief you guys about UFOs," that they would have said, "Thanks, but no thanks. We've got some other things to consider right now." So he changed the term to UAP, because with the term UAP, you could be talking about a drone, you could be talking about a UFO, or you could be talking about something else entirely. So this allowed him to get his foot in the door with Congress and to get them to hear the story. And now that they've heard it, as most of your audience probably knows, many of these congressmen have been bitten by the bug, and they are quite excited about the UFO subject. The one to me that's the most interesting of all is Chuck Schumer. He's the head of the Democratic Party, which is in control of the Senate. He's the top dog, as you might say, right now. He never had been involved with UFOs prior to the last couple of years, yet he basically endorsed the current UFO or UAP now legislation that was part of the National Security Defense Bill, the NDAA. And you have to think about that. Why would someone in his position and the power he has be willing to put his name on something like that unless he felt very confident that there was traction behind the subject?
It has been said that the U.S. government possesses not just 2, but 5 videos from 2015 of UFOs operating in the vicinity of the USS Roosevelt nuclear aircraft carrier. What, Robert, can you tell me about those videos?
Here's why I know there are 3 more videos that the government has that they have not released and probably will never release. In the year 2017, the New York Times came out with a big front page article about UFOs. There were 2 videos that they released. One was a video from 2004, which involved the USS Nimitz case on the Pacific Ocean. The second was a video that's now, the term most people call it is the gimbal video. And this is a video of an object which looks a little disc-shaped and then it turns vertical. Those were the only 2 videos released. So bear in mind that in that second video was from 2015, and it was the USS Roosevelt. Well, I had an officer contact me, and he said, I wanted to tell you something about those 2 videos. When this guy calls me, first thing I think, is this guy real? Is this guy pulling my leg? What's going on? He calls and he says, that video from 2004? I don't know anything about it. Never seen it in my life. But the other one from 2015, he tells me that came from the USS Roosevelt. And I said, oh, really? Okay. And he said, and there are 4 other videos besides that one. And I said, okay, can you describe them to me? And so I'm taking notes. And one of them that he describes to me is the video that was released about 6 months later. And it was called, today we call it the Go Fast video. And it's of this object that seems to be moving rapidly along the surface of the ocean. When that second video got released, then I knew this guy was telling me the truth, because that was one of the videos he described. In the other videos that he described, the one that will likely never be released is one that he describes it is this object is racing towards the F-18. And the F-18 pilot at that moment locks his radar to his dummy missile. And at the moment he locks his radar on that dummy missile, the object that's headed towards him on the video suddenly moves rapidly. And he described it as if you took a laser beam and just flashed it across your wall. That's how fast it moved. And he said, all of the radar data is captured right there on the screen. So that's how I know there are 3 other videos that we likely will never see.
In the latter chapters in your book, you discuss the extraterrestrial hypothesis, considering the thousands of exoplanets that have been discovered in the last 20 years. Could you, Robert, elaborate a bit on that hypothesis?
And that's a good word, Stan. Let me elaborate first on the word hypothesis, because a lot of people assume that if I say I believe in this hypothesis, that I'm submitted on that view, that it has to be extraterrestrial. And that's not what it means at all. It just means that is a theory that, as of right now, is the one that I think is the most likely. I consider it the most likely hypothesis, but it doesn't mean that there might not be data that shows up tomorrow it convinces me, no, it's not that, it's something else. Today, and I showed this in the book, until 1992, we had no idea there was another solar system anywhere else in our universe. As a matter of fact, many scientists felt that we were unique, like we always think we're unique. As time has moved on, now we have discovered almost 6,000 extrasolar planets. So when you have that many planets, and many of those have Earth-like qualities in terms of their distance from their sun, they're in what they call a habitable zone, that it's almost certain that there's life on some of those planets and probably intelligent life. So it's no longer a question of, is there intelligent life or can it develop? It's only a question of, can it reach our planet? That's the only question. And sometimes some people will even say, well, how would they even know we're here? Well, exactly by the same methods that we know that there are these extrasolar planets out there. And in 40 to 50 years, our equipment will have gotten good enough that we'll be able to determine, for example, on the dark side of a planet, is there light being emitted? If someone was looking at planet Earth from 20 light years away and had just a little bit better technology than we have today, they would look at the dark side of our planet and they would say, there's light. Why is there light on the dark side of the planet? It should be nightfall. Well, because there are cities that are lighting up the dark side of our planet. So by 1930, anyone who was carefully observing our planet would know that there was intelligent life here. I think that's why I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the most likely.
You, Robert, argue that it's time for a change in the study of UFOs, and you make the case for what needs to be done going forward. What are your suggestions in that regard?
Over the 17 years I've studied this, I've thought, okay, we need to get the military to release the data, and we need them to do this, and they need to be more open. But I've come to the realization it's never going to happen. And I don't think it will ever happen because of their national security concern. So I think if Congress really wants to get the answer, what they need to do is the same thing they did with global warming. They need to allocate funding that's specific for UFOs. They can have NASA or the National Science Foundation divvy out the funds to various universities and scientific groups that are willing to study the subject. It needs to be examined and studied in that sphere outside of the military sphere. Because if you think about it, science is about openness. And by definition, intelligence operatives in the military is not about openness. And they can't be because of the jobs they have. We need to take it out of that sphere and into the sphere of academia and scientific organizations if we want an answer someday.
As stated in my introduction, Robert, you are currently on the board of the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs. What can you tell me about SCU, such as its mandate and your involvement with them?
SCU's mission is the scientific study of the UAP subject. It's a very crisp, distinct mission. It was founded in 2017 as a nonprofit. And so any donations to it are tax writable. You can write them off your taxes. Today, 7 years after it was founded, we have over 300 members. Over 30% of our membership have PhDs. And so what that tells your audience is the world of science is interested in the subject of UAP or UFOs. It's not a subject that all scientists push their hands up and say, we don't want to talk about this subject. There are plenty of scientists, and I talk to them all the time, that consider this a very interesting subject and that it's worthy of scientific investigations. And SCU every year puts on a conference. And this year, it will be May 31st to June 2nd and it will be in Huntsville, Alabama. Your audience might not know that 2 years ago, one of the people who came to our conference was David Grush, the gentleman who indicated that he believes we have crashed UFOs in our possession. At the time, we didn't know who David Grush was, but we later found out that, yes, he was attending our conference. So it's a great conference to attend. And even if you can't attend in person, we have a live internet version that you're able to actually mingle in and meet all the individuals at the conference through the internet. Your audience can find out about this by just going to our website, explorescu.org, and we have our conference on the front of that page.
You're ahead of me with that. I was just going to ask you, should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy your book, UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know, and also learn about the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs? How, Robert, can they do that? You've already answered one of them. Now, the second part.
For the book, they can find out about the book two different ways. One, if they're fans of Twitter, they can go on their Twitter page. And if they go to my page, which is called R. Powell to You, there is a link to the book directly through the publisher. And the other way, of course, they can go to Amazon.com and put in my name and the word UFOs, and they'll find the book.
Robert Powell, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Yakking with you has been the most informative experience.
Thank you, Stan, and I've enjoyed it also. It's been a great discussion.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.